Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator. I'm all about capturing and curating career and life stories as a meaningful way to celebrate a milestone moment like a big O birthday, anniversary, retirement, or graduation. And I'm at my best when curating photo books that move your memories from the basement or your phone or your computer to the coffee table, giving you and your family and friends access to these treasured memories for years to come. I also love curating and capturing life and career stories through this podcast series, How Did I Get Here? It's a series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they're not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Shara Ruffin, who is a clinical social worker and who also consults in the social workspace. Welcome, Shara.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. I appreciate you being here.
We're going to pause for a moment to hear from a very happy Life Story Curator client.
I'm a client of Life Story Curator, and I reached out to Kathy to do my husband's 50th birthday book. And I chose to use Kathy because I've seen her work, and of course, I've known her for a long time, and I knew that the product would be way above standard. I've done books myself, and I knew that she would do an exemplary job. The process working with Kathy is very organized, and we started off with interviewing me, coming up with a deeper analysis of who my husband is. And through that process, we came up with things I would never thought of on my own. With just her asking certain questions, it triggered memories and special things that really added a great deal of value when we went to put the book together. And I hadn't remembered all these things when I first talked to her about it. So having that interview was great. When my husband opened the book on his birthday, he was nervous, of course, at first, and then very excited and quite emotional. That he's from New Zealand, and so having family represented from so far away in this book was really, really special. And I know that family and friends from afar were pleased to be able to be part of this process. And I couldn't have done, half the job that Kathy did, particularly in the time frame. And it was just beautifully presented. And she captured him very well. And she helped me sort of narrow down the focus and the amount of photos. And it couldn't have been any better.
Well, I'm very excited to learn more about you. So let's start off with the icebreaker questions, which my listeners know is a matter of finding out where you grew up, what part of the country or the world, as well as where you are in the birth order in your family and how those two dynamics shaped you as a person.
Sure. So I grew up in Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am the oldest of 5 children. And what was the last question? I'm sorry.
Well, just how those two things, growing up in
how those
Philadelphia
two things
and being the
influence
oldest.
you. Well, wow. So I grew up to 2 teenage parents. They were quite unexpected to have their first child at 18 and 19 years old. This was back in the 80s. I'm 37. I'll be 38 in March. So it was a time period for them where they were just still kids, and I was their first one. Being the oldest child, I am very type A. I'm very orderly. I had to learn to be more flexible when I became a mother. But it was definitely more with my parents. They put a lot of pressure on me to go to school to get education. So I was kind of the first one to do a lot of things in my family. The first one to go to college, first one to get a master's degree, first one to get a professional license, first one to do a lot of things, build a business, to break a lot of intergenerational curses in my family. and kind of lead the way for my siblings. Education was something that was very important to my parents just because they only had a high school diploma. My father was in the military for quite a number of years in the Navy. My mother was a homemaker for many years until she went to work later on after her children were in school age. So,
Okay, so that firstborn had to be responsible, had to go out
mhm,
and yeah, firstborn meaning you had to do everything first because there was no one ahead of you, right? So everything you did was
exactly.
what's the age difference between your siblings?
So the age difference is, so my brother Mark, he is only months behind me. So I'm 37, he's 36. My sister is 6 years younger than me. And then I have two brothers were adopted. One is deceased. He would have been going on 20 this year. He died about it'll be 2 years ago next month. He was 18.
Mhm.
And then my other brother, he's 22 years old. So that is the range of the children.
So it was kind of a two of you really close. One, your sister then comes, but then brothers come later. But so it's kind of a
Mm,
blended family then too, right? In terms
very
of
much. Very
yeah.
much so. My two younger brothers, they were adopted when they were babies. My mother used to do a lot of foster care sit-ins just because she wanted to be a social worker, but she couldn't get the education or couldn't afford to do so. So she started to work part-time in foster care, and she would place foster care children in her home and take care of them. She fell in love with these two children who were basically starving to death. Samir Sabian came to us when they were months old, and they were very, very ill and sickly. And she didn't want to give them back. So instead of placing them back into care of the system, she adopted both of them.
Wow. What a giving, generous person. That is just, with already having kids of her own. I mean, that's got to be a pretty big burden to put on the family, but also something she was compelled to do, right? That she just couldn't let him go back in. Wow. So what did you
Yeah.
do for fun as a young person and in your family? Did you guys, was it music, sports, or theater, or
So
what was?
sports, not so much. I love football, but I was not a sports person at all. Very much a girly girl. Tomboyish in the beginning of my early years. I was very much an introvert in my early years, elementary school. I love reading. My parents, I love them to death, so I don't want the readers to think otherwise. But a lot of what I do now in my career was birthed out of the journey of trauma. My parents were both great parents. They did what they could at the time, but my father was very emotionally and physically abusive to my mom. So there was a lot of trauma growing up for the first 20 years, I want to say. At the same time, the flip side of that, my parents were very hardworking. They provided what they could to their children, but they weren't perfect. So my mother, she was always a very giving, very sensitive, empathetic, but my father was the stringent type A parent, militant mindset. So it incorporated a lot of fear at times. At the same time, he was very anytime that we needed anything, he was there to give it. He was a very present parent, just in terms of his own temperament and his parenting style had implications that were not always good. So growing up, I have fond memories of my family going out, doing outings every summer. We would go to the park or we would go to an amusement park. I never knew how poor my family was growing up. We never knew, and I didn't know until I got older that I understood. Even when I became a parent, because I grew up in such a low income family in West Philadelphia and Section 8 housing. Um, my parents did the best that they could with us, but at times I will say that we had happy moments just like any family, but we also had moments of um, hardship and growing up. There were times that for me, the best way that I could escape that, especially growing up in a community where there was violence and my parents were also very protective, I always found my way into a book. Books could take me anywhere in the world, especially when my father was in the military early on, probably around elementary school into my early middle school. He was away from us a lot um, until he got out the Navy. So in my early years, escaping to a book whenever I felt uncomfortable or fearful of the world, getting to a good book was my best friend. That may be boring to some, but that's how I escaped. A lot of times I would be outside and either kids would be playing, I would be in a book and I would used to get teased for it. But I think there was a catalyst for me escaping into reading that really helped me to be where I am now, in terms
Wow.
of my love for education.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Well, you kind of touched on now the next question I was going to lead into, which
Mm.
was, are you an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert? You mentioned introvert as a young person. Would you still say that's a trait of yours, or do you feel like you get your energy now more from other people or in different ways?
I would say I'm a little bit of both. I love my space. I love being to myself. A lot of people don't believe that because I'm on social media so much, and I'm. People would think that I'm just this extroverted, confident person all the time. I'm not. A lot of times for me, it's kind of pushing the fear or the comfortability limit to know that it's just a fear and I can kind of get through it. I usually will push myself through it. I always have. So I would say I'm a little bit of both because when I was a kid, I was more introverted. Um, and I still love my space. I still love hiding from people and just hiding away from the world and getting to a good book or a good movie or something. When I got to college, it was very interesting because it was a little bit of both. When I had to be more focused about my books, I was a straight A student, but there were periods people would think I was more extroverted because I became the first African American homecoming queen at my school. I was very much into a lot of student organizations. So there was a part of me in terms of the extroverted personality traits that were cultivated in college, but I could move between both worlds. But there would be periods where I would just hide away and just want to be by myself because I found so much solace in it, if
Yeah,
that
and
makes any sense.
recharge the battery, right? You were in the spotlight in so many ways. It sounds like that
Mhm.
that was your way to come back and recharge and get back to who you were, right? And what you
Mhm.
really enjoy doing. But you could do the other things, right? The more expressive
I
extrovert.
could. It did take some confidence to get there, though. Especially going and being in college, because I was going from an inner city environment where I knew everyone, and then being dropped into Amish country in rural Pennsylvania. I don't know if you ever, well, you're in
Oh,
Colorado, rural Pennsylvania with the Amish country, where the city shuts down at like 7 o'clock. There's nothing to do. That was my world for 5 years beyond the Poconos Mountains, and it totally changed my perspective as a
yeah.
young person between the ages of 18 to 22 years old.
Wow, what a contrasting life, right? To go from, like you said, inner city section 8 being right in the heart probably of urban to now this rural community. I grew up in a rural community out here in Colorado in a small town named Elizabeth. And so we had 40 acres and we had, cows and chickens and pigs and things like that. But we weren't really a big farm. We were just like as they would say, gentleman's farm or whatever. But yeah. And then you also mentioned about the economic status. You don't realize what you don't have until you see what others have. And that was probably a realization in college too, huh? That where where and how you grew up versus how some of the other people grew up that you were going to college with.
Very much so. But I don't think it really didn't bother me as much. When I went to college, I was ready to go. I I I was ready to get out. I had started planning for college my sophomore year. I started going to college fairs. My parents didn't know how to navigate that space, so I found supports within my school counselor's office, which no one really went into. I was in a port school district at the time. So every resource he had in terms of getting free waivers, college fairs, I was there. I was going. And I ended up at a small rural school called La Cave University, which is about 30 minutes away from Penn State University Park. So really smack in the middle of nowhere. And I fell in love with the place. I did. I spent 5 years of my early part of my youth in my early 20s there. And then I went from there back into the inner city life. I went straight to DC after that. And that was a whole nother other piece of my journey when I went straight to grad school. So
Yeah.
yeah, I spent
Wow.
about 4 years in the DMV area, DC, Virginia, and Northeast Capitol Street. No, yeah, Northeast Capitol Street. So I've lived in DC, Virginia, and Maryland from 20, 2009 to 2013. And then I came back to Philadelphia
And then
and
back
I've
to
been here ever
Philadelphia.
since.
Okay. Okay. Well, before we get into how did we get here, more of the story and what you're doing today, a couple more icebreaker questions and then we'll start getting into it. On the fun meter scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a couch potato and 5 being the life of the party, where do you put yourself?
I would say in the middle. I could be it depends on my mood and how I feel. Sometimes especially I'm in a world where I'm constantly talking and I think now I just rather be more of a couch potato. But there's some instance where I'm more the life of the party because I plan a lot of my family's family events. So yeah, I can be that's hard because I can be either or depending on how I feel.
Yeah, depending on how you feel, and probably who you're with.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
of people who answer that question with depends, and then there are some that are just like, I'm 100% a 5. I'm always they always are the life of the party. Okay, on the risk meter, same scale, 1 to 5, 1 being low risk taker, 5 being high risk taker. Where do you put yourself on risk taking?
I think risk taking is such a broad term because if someone were to ask me, "Hey, you want to climb Mount Everest?" I'm like, "No." But if I've jumped out of an airplane before. That's
Oh,
probably the most highest risk taking I've ever done. Um, um, but in terms of extreme sports or anything, no, I'm pretty much. I think because I have children. I don't want to be here for them. So anything to make my risk of mortality less, I would rather keep my feet on the ground. So I
yeah,
think it depends on what risk taking means in what context.
yeah. Because when I think about what you did to go to college and find, you really had to put yourself out there. So to me, that's a pretty big risk taker. In enlisting other people to help you and to find ways to do that, sometimes it's
Mm,
easier to not, that's really putting yourself out there, right? And a lot of times as a young person, I don't know, I was ready to do that. So
yeah,
okay.
I wasn't. I don't think I was ready. I think for me, I knew that education was going to be my way out. I'll give you a
Mm.
brief 1 minute story. So in the sixth grade, I went to private school for a year. And my father couldn't afford anything after that, but it pretty much changed my whole view of education. Growing up as a Black student in a poor district, going to a private Christian school where a lot of the kids were years ahead of you because they were in private school most of their lives. It pretty much, when I left even that 1 year, it left an impression on me in regards to how education could open up doors for me. So it was a pretty impactful year for me to see that I needed to make sure that I was going to be equipped with what I needed to survive that type of academic rigor. And I did. So,
Wow. So a real, probably a confidence booster in one sense, right? Because you survived it and you had probably, achieved a certain level of success there, but then probably a confidence, I don't know, one of those challenges to your confidence, right? That's saying, because you got there and you went, wait a minute, I was pretty smart in my other school. Now this one, not so much, huh?
quite a challenge when I went to college. So, the first year, no one saw me, no one knew who I was. So, I spent most of my time in the library because I was so scared to fail. My father, again, was very militant. And I remember him telling me right before I went, hey, he said, I think this may not be a good idea. I think you may want to think about doing something else or going to the regular program that they have. When I applied to Lock Haven, I got a letter from them saying, you have been invited to be a part of the honors program. And I accepted it. I was like, oh, this is cool because my resume was pretty long for a high school student. Pretty much like 5 pages long. I was in all these activities and everything. It was a lot. If I had to go back and look at my high school boxes, I keep a box of every year, like time capsules. And I remember him saying it scared the living Jesus out of me. So my first semester, I was like, oh my God, I can't fail out. I got to prove my father wrong. And I made the dean's list my first semester of college. It was a double-edged sword though, because it pretty much birthed my generalized anxiety disorder that I had, that I didn't know I had until my junior year of college. But it also helped me to cultivate such confidence that year. After that, I think the first year or two, I started kind of becoming more of a social butterfly again. I became a homecoming queen my sophomore year, but it took some time for me to learn that balance then. Um, Even though when I look back at a lot of my old organizers, they were color coded. And these are the precursors to my ADHD combined type, which I also have in the learning disorder. So there's a lot there to pick at, but
Yeah, there's a
yeah.
lot there to pick at. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that. Let's spend a little bit of time on what you're doing today as a clinical social worker and consulting in that same space. And then we'll get into how did I get here?
Sure. So I run a consulting company called Journey to Licensure. It was birthed out of my journey of not being able to pass my board exams. As formally, I said that I have ADHD, combined type, a learning disorder, as well as generalized anxiety disorder. I'm also a former therapist of 18 years. So there's that piece too. But going back to the birth of that company, the brief story is on LinkedIn, I had cultivated a very good presence there. And I told 30,000 followers that I was going to pass an exam, my
Ah,
licensing exam. And I failed. This was 2019. I missed it by 3 points. This exam takes 2 years. It took me 10. And it took 10 years because of life happening. In social work, we have three different exam levels: bachelor, master's degree level, and then our clinical licensure, which requires supervision and training to qualify for that exam. And when I graduated from Howard University, very briefly in 2010, life just started happening. I got married, went through a first licensing exam, failed my master level exam. 3 points. Took it again 2 years later, passed it, lost a child. I had a stillbirth daughter with my ex-husband, formerly so it was in Afghanistan, was my first child. His fourth, I believe, at the time. That was very traumatic. Then having my second child, Jaden, who was medically compromised. He's now going to be 10 years old, and he wasn't supposed to live till 10. He was supposed to live only months. The doctor said he may not make it because he had a kidney abnormality. He had surgery at 6 months. When that happens, my marriage starts to deteriorate and fall apart, literally. My husband at the time was in Tennessee, about to retire from 26 years in the Army. I was taking care of my son in Philadelphia. I had transitioned back to Philadelphia because I needed help from family, which was hard. My brother at the time was going through suicidality. My mother was going through depression, and so was my sister. And I'm with this small little baby who's compromised on top of working at a crisis hospital, 3 hours away from home, no public transportation, and then having to find my way to work every single day for 6 to 7 years, on top of dealing with my own depression, in and out of therapy myself, secondary trauma due to a lot of the stress of being Shara, the therapist. And then when 4 or 5 o'clock rolls around, I'm grabbing anything that I can find to drown my misery of having a broken life, as I thought, with taking care of a child who could get sick at any time, and I would lose money because I was a single mother. My ex-husband didn't provide much care. I had to provide care for him. And then after that, when the pandemic hit, I was on my second attempt for my clinical exam, and I did pass it. But a year prior to that, I tried it my first time in 2019, failed it by 2 points, and I was pretty devastated. It took many years on top of life circumstances to get to that point of qualifying for the exam. But I did ultimately make it. So I tried to keep it short and brief, but those are some pivotal triumphs that I had. And it birthed my consulting company that works with social workers more holistically in where they are, not just on their exam preparation, but helping them to cultivate their own strength and resilience while they're going through the licensing process, on top of assessing them for any cognitive disorders, learning disorders, anxiety, which is one of my 23 specialties. So I'll pause there.
Wow. Wow. Well, that tells us a lot about kind of even how you got to where you are today, but a lot about the work that you do. So, did you always want to be then a social worker and a therapist? And I mean, was that something? I mean, you mentioned that your mom, when you were little, always wanted to do that. So, were you kind of following her first footsteps, or what did you want to be when you grew up when you were like 14 or 15?
I wanted to be the next Mariah Carey. Well, I loved the singer Brandy Norwood back then. It's very impressionable, but I used to do a lot of singing choirs at school. But that dream died out because my parents couldn't really take me to auditions or anything like that. So it pretty much, I think I ended up compensating for that dream by honing in on my studies and education. When I got to college, I wanted to be a lawyer. I went from wanting to be a lawyer to psychology and social work, and here I am. So
Okay, okay. Well, yeah, it's always interesting how, when you're a young person, what you're drawn to. And I got to tell you, out of the 140 some interviews I've done, I will say maybe 10% have had that, clear plan. I want to be an X, and then they went and did it. But then I'll also say many of them aren't even doing that again today, that they achieved that thing that they wanted so bad. And then after they got in it for a while, there was a time where they needed to transition or pivot into something else. So it's very interesting. So you're not alone in
yeah,
your,
no,
I
not at
wanted to
all.
be a singer and follow my dreams. And then, okay, now I'll be a lawyer. And then, then that led to psychology and then to therapy. So, okay. So, give us a little bit of insight then on some of those first jobs, and it sounds like the energy it takes to put into a mental health space is so much of you, and then you have to go home, and then it's your family. I don't know how you did it.
I don't at times even know. I think, well, my first job coming out of grad school in 2010 was being a medical case manager. I did HIV medical case manager and learned a lot about that field. It was my first job, and I'm very grateful I had it. And I transitioned from that into straight working in outpatient hospital a couple of years later, and had been in that part probably ever since. I loved learning the underlying causes of behavior. I think that's why I went from lawyer to psychology.
Mm.
Psychology became too much science for me. And my introduction class pretty much said, no, this isn't for you. You don't like neurotransmitters. So there's some science you do have to learn in some of your classes, even in social work regarding human behavior, but they're not as science-based as psychology. So I was like, no, I'm gonna give that up. So once I went to social work, it was once my advisor said, hey, I think you would do better in social work. And I said, don't they just take kids away? I don't understand. He's like, no, they do a lot more than that. I think you would be a good fit for it. And I had fell in love right after intro class. I had been in the field for 18 plus years. And it's been quite a ride. I've been in different settings, mental health hospitals, outpatient, inpatient settings. I've had different roles going from case manager, community organizer, um, before I even hit to being a therapist. Therapist was probably like the last position that I stayed in for many years because I knew once I got my master's, because I had a mental health concentration, that I wanted to get into therapy. But at the time, I didn't have much experience. So when I came back to Philadelphia with my baby boy, I decided that I would do contractual work to get some experience and then apply for a therapy job. And it just so happens that the contractual company that I work with, it ended up turning into a full-time job. They had an opening and they offered it to me and I took it. And I stayed there for about 8 years total, but as a licensed group and individual therapist and cultivating a lot of specializations. I loved it. Um, but there are also pieces of that work that was exhausting, pieces of that work that was stressful, especially with a lot of the life circumstances I had to go through once I left that job in the evenings, taking care of a very sick child. And then once I was able to get into public transportation, having to go 2 buses and a train back and forth for many years, rain, sleet, snow, I had to go to work. It was hard, but
Wow.
I love the work and it definitely prepared me for what I do now.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you told 30,000 people, your followers, that you were going to
Yeah.
pass this test. Did you have 30,000 followers as a therapist, or was there another stage in there that you really started
Yes,
promoting into your
there's
social
a
media? Yeah.
yes, there's another part of that. So, in 2018, started to become more active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn at the time was still seen as such a resume type platform. And I posted a couple of stories on LinkedIn about my military story, being a former military wife, the demise of my marriage, and letting people into that world, especially counselors who were working with that population, but they have no idea how to treat that population, how to build trust or with them. So I shared a little bit of my story as a licensed mental health professional, but also as someone that had been in that world, was a military child, and became a military wife. Um, so I shared the story, it blew up. And that's when LinkedIn had articles back then. And I was like, what are people responding to? I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and start posting stories a little bit more about me. I didn't need a job. Was just became very interested in learning what people were responding to through storytelling. Well, a year later in 2019, when I started going through my own mental health struggles, and more so when it related to career development and licensing, I started sharing that journey when I got laid off work a week before the pandemic, and was going to take my exam again. And I started doing videos. I was encouraged by an influencer at the time. She said, "Hey, people, I love the fact that you have these 30,000 followers over here, but what are you doing with them? How are you cultivating them? What value?" I said, I don't have anything to sell. And she's like, "That's fine. But if they don't see you, they're not going to trust you." So I started doing video showing that journey of going through the transitions and talking about them. People really related to them. LinkedIn was starting to transition from just being a place where people could look for work, but building their reputation, professional branding, things like that. I didn't know I was doing branding at all. I just was trying to find a way to reach people, because in the places that I've worked at, no one would dare walk into an office. There's so much stigma when it came to mental health. So
Mhm.
LinkedIn, the 30,000 followers was probably an accumulation of me sharing stories, and I had never showed my face. I didn't show my face until 2019 when I started doing videos, and of course, my following grew a lot, substantially more. Um, but now my profile probably looks nothing like it did many years ago. But nonetheless, LinkedIn has been a very good comfort zone for me, and a very good motivator, in a sense, to keep telling my story and hoping keep people inspired to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think back to that question about extrovert and introvert, this putting yourself out there in such a vulnerable way. Um, Initially, it sounds like you started doing that writing and then it turned into the video. So was your underlying message then about how to remove the stigma about mental health and how to really, you have to put yourself out there and you have to get help? Is that kind of what was maybe the
Yes,
underlying part of
that
it?
that was my it was that was the reason why I started. Once I saw the articles were getting a lot of reach, they don't get as much reach anymore. Newsletters is the new big thing on LinkedIn now, but back then it was articles. I think for me, because I had such a stigma with mental health myself, even as a professional, getting help, navigating that, wanting people to look at me not as someone that has all the answers, but someone who generally wants to help people, but is willing to be vulnerable to do it. So that was pretty much, I would say, the vehicle that I used to grow a community on the platform.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I am kind of blown away that it was LinkedIn because I would think that's more of a Facebook following is more personal. When I was in corporate
Mhm.
for 25 years, corporate leadership roles and stuff, and it was always about how do you separate your persona, right? It was kind of here's your
Mhm.
professional persona, here's your, and in the end, it was everywhere for both. But it felt like LinkedIn was more about that resume, like you said, and the job experience and but yeah, you're a therapist. So then again, there your whole world is your business of therapy, right? And people
Mhm.
and stories and how do we figure this out, this journey of life? So okay, very interesting. So you told 30,000 people you're going to pass the test. It didn't happen.
Mhm. It didn't
Then,
happen.
yeah,
Yeah, it didn't happen. And I started doing video. My son was all of them, my two stepdaughters and my son was thrown into homeschool and it was a mess. I was depressed pretty much for about 8 or 9 months. I had to borrow money from my family to get an updated psych eval because I was fighting with the board to say I need a combination of something for this exam. I've worked so many years to get to this point and I'm right there. And my whole career was at a standstill and the world was at a standstill when the pandemic hit. I was just home. My partner was outside of the home, working because he works outside of the home, and it was just really a rough time. Um, the 8 or 9 months I spent mostly just playing games with my kids and finding comfort and building little imaginary worlds in this game called Animal Crossing. So it's similar to like the Sims game, but it was just one of those things that I fell in love with games again. I had fell off for many years because I was, in my career. And it allowed me to have a connection. So besides doing videos on LinkedIn, whether I was cooking, cleaning, my son would pop up in the videos. People became really interested in my little boy, and they ask about him now. I mean, he'll be 10, and a lot of my followers were like, Jaden's growing up. They're watching him grow up in real time because they've been watching him since he was probably 4 or 5 years old. So they ask about him a lot. Now that he's older, he's like, video, he'll pop in every once in a while to say hi to the LinkedIn people, but that's about it. But it's interesting because I let people into my world. I went from, talking about mental health, my own struggles, being broken and on food stamps, to birthing a six-figure company once I did pass. The struggles of learning how to manage and run a company. There's a lot of different things that came out of a lot of the resilience and even my life story of starting with nothing and building something out of nothing, even when I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And that was probably a theme that's been throughout my life, um, that still holds true when people ask me about the resilience. And I said, I think for me, it was probably birthed out of the life that I was born into and finding a way when it feels like there's no way.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like your parents were role models of that though too. That,
Oh yeah.
like you said, you didn't have a lot of money, but you didn't know that. And yet they still provided a home and you could go to the park in the summers and you could have some happy memories, even though there was some that maybe weren't as happy. So, well,
Mhm.
sure, I could keep asking you questions all afternoon. And so we probably need to start wrapping up. So, because
Mhm.
sometimes these wrap up questions, while I have two wrap up questions, they can, they get some good meat to them. So let's
Yeah.
start with the first wrap up, which is when you do look back on your life, and you touched on this just a little bit with the word resilience, what do you think served you best? Is there a characteristic or a strength or a personality trait maybe that you feel like served you best over time?
I ooh, that's a meaty question indeed. I would say my willingness to adapt and remain flexible, and having faith, which was hard. A lot of times people look at my journey up till now and think, man, um, I don't know how you got through those dark times, of losing your daughter, of having another baby that was supposed to die, hardships of losing a marriage, heartbreak, and all of that. Um, I think for me, having a strong faith, but also my willingness to just be adaptable. And I always kept going. I never looked back. I just kept going. No matter what bomb was going off in my life, I was like, I got to keep moving. I kept telling myself, this is not going to last forever. Every life hardship circumstance, I would think, it sounds cliche to teach you something. You may not realize, you may not like it when you're going through it, but when you do get through to the other side of it, there is something that you're supposed to pull as a lesson for you to pivot to the next part or phase of that journey. And I think that's how I looked at a lot of the hardships and painful moments in my life, including the ones that were not so great, even in my family pathology, is pulling the lessons that I can learn and, not repeat. So
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes we do repeat those things, right? That we grew up in that environment and it just starts in that environment or stays in that environment. Yeah, wow. And I guess the other strength I see of yours is the fact that you as a therapist and being a social worker helped so many people in so many ways, probably in your day job. And then you came home and you had all these own personal challenges. I don't, wow, I admire your strength and your determination and your moving forward. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you, Kathy.
So last wrap up question then. Any words of wisdom that impacted you as you were going through any hard times or maybe times where you were in transition or maybe those low points, right? And it can be a quote or it could be something maybe that you just held on to for yourself that maybe other people can then relate to.
Oh, there's so many. I would say the one that I'm thinking about right now, because I've been reading Will Smith's memoir. He talks about this brick that his father used to have to build. Well, that he had his father had him build brick by brick. And I was like, I think that's pretty much what my life has been. Not thinking about the whole wall that has to be built, but building one brick at a time on as a foundation. Each part of my life is a brick. Each hardship, painful one is a brick, and building that wall, and I'm still building it. Rome wasn't built in a day. That's we all heard that one, right? And I think with me being as ambitious as I've always been, even dealing with imposter syndrome. I always, on the outside, people would think, oh my God, she just, anything she touches is going to turn into gold. No, it's years of failure, hard work, fighting myself. I would say, know that you're not perfect, but be okay making mistakes. And sometimes we got to learn them over and over again until we get them right. That's just the process. But be willing to take the chance. You have one life to live as far as you know. It's I don't like the quote as much of being, I'm having a little moment, ADHD moment, where they say live every day to your last day. I believe in living each day um, in a way that's going to make you proud that you lived it.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
so don't focus on it's your last day. Maybe it's just your best day, right? Or that
yep.
yeah, that you'll be proud of it. So I like that. I like that you had several pieces in there because I do know the pressure. I'm always one of these people when they're like, what one word describes your day? I'm like, I can't come up with one word, right? It's or that one thing or that one theory. So I
Mhm.
like the brick by brick piece. And you also talked earlier about the things come into your life to teach us. And sometimes they stick around longer than we need, right? We thought we got the
Yes.
lesson, right? And then, but it's still there.
Yes.
That teacher is still there. You're like, what? When are you going to leave? And then let's come up with a different lesson or different teaching moment. So, all right. Well, Tara, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I really appreciate you putting that out there. And you've been sharing your story to millions, probably millions, thousands, I guess, let's say, for years now. So I appreciate that you are so comfortable being in that space because the more I think we can all share these stories, the more people can relate to them and then maybe get out of their own way. I know when I was coming through my career, I always felt like everybody had it figured out. And when was I going to figure it out? And when could I be at that next level? And what do they have that I don't have? And well, once you start talking to people behind the scenes and really getting to know them as a human being, you start recognizing they're doing the best they can with what they were given, and they're just in a different position. And what did they bring to the table, and what do I bring? And yeah, it's very freeing, and maybe that's an age thing too. I guess at this age, I feel very free, and I don't put all that pressure on myself then, like I did back then. So anyway, that's why I love sharing these stories. And I love how you come into that picture now. And who knows where this is going to go, me into your network, you into my network, and the storytelling just continues. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate. I hope anyone listening gets some lessons or little tidbits that they can take for themselves. And I just every day to me is more precious. I would say, especially with some of the losses I've had recently. It's just when we have those moments where we realize our mortality is very precious and life is very fleeting. We remember the meaning of each breath that we take. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Well, I no, I keep going here. We're kind of wrapping, but you faced mortality so early on. I mean, do you think that was a big lesson for you then? I'm guessing it had to be, right? Because right away with your daughter,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
and then that, like, that wasn't enough. Your son comes into the picture and he's got, like you said, some compromised health issues, and so you don't know what that's going to mean, right? The uncertainty of it all. Wow.
Very, very much so. And very much so, I would say. And then losing my baby brother, Samir,
Oh
he
yeah.
died. Yeah, 6 blocks away from my house. He was 18 years old, left my mom's house and got shot twice and he's gone. Um, it'll be his anniversary is February 17th. Um, and it'll be 2 years. So it's just one of those things that I'm like, this guy, this kid will never reach my age. You realize in those moments, even in the most saddest moments, because I miss him dearly, but um, I'm someone that's very spiritual and believes that there's a plan for everyone. There are two moments that are very much guaranteed: when we're born and when we die. Those 2 points are very much guaranteed. But the in between that journey from the time that you birth to the moment that you pass away, those are moments that you do have control over to cultivate for yourself. So that's kind of what I go with, I think,
Yeah. Yeah. And make it your best. Make it your best day, right? And Rick
as best you
Frankfurt.
can.
Okay. Well, thank you again for sharing your story. And listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below and you'll be alerted when other interviews are published. I'll be posting this interview on my website, lifestorycurator.com, in the blog section. And in that post, Shara, I'll put your information in there if you're okay with me sharing your social
Oh, it's
media.
fine. No, no
Because
problem.
obviously I want people that now that they hear this, they may be like, oh, I need to talk to her. I want to subscribe to her blogs and her videos, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, we have ways to be in touch with both of us. And on that note, I'll say stay safe, stay well, and let's keep sharing those stories. Have a great day.